Hello everyone and welcome to a new video from Your Overwatch. I'm Eddie the Chump and today we'll be getting a little conceptual, so bear with me. Okay, so Overwatch is kind of like Street Fighter. Wait for it? Well, that is to say, it's kind of like all fighting games. Now that seems quite a strange concept at first glance. One is an FPS and one is a 2.5D fighting game. But if you look a little bit closer, you can see they actually have a lot in common. The first subject I really want to delve into is a concept called footsies. Footsies in fighting games refers to a specific part of the fight, not all of it. The concept breaks down like this. Both characters stand at what's called neutral distance, which is the distance you start at the beginning of a round. Both characters have different sets of moves, not special moves, but what are called normals. And those are the moves that your character would perform when pressing any of the buttons, like light punch, hard punch, medium punch, etc, etc. Now different characters have different normals, and they have different startup frames, that is the amount of frames of animation they take to start. They have different active frames, those are the frames that count as the move actually being able to do any damage, and they have what's called recovery frames, which are when the normal stops being active and becomes vulnerable. So with different characters with different normals with different sets of animations, what this means is that each player is trying to basically outwit and bait their opponent into pressing a button. When they do so, they want to do something that's called whiff punishing. Whiff punishing is using a normal of your own after your opponent has pressed a button and your button punishes their move. This is the game of footsies. You're trying to move forward into your opponent's range, bait them into pressing a button while remaining at a safe distance, and then punishing them. This concept is everywhere in Overwatch, and it's something, because I play both kinds of games, that I noticed very quickly. One of the characters that I used and noticed this immediately was Soldier 76. The reason for this is because he can do damage, walk forward, seemingly overextending, and then sprint. So Soldier can actually play fighting game footsies in a first-person shooter. When people talk about positioning and the importance it has in shooting games, this is what they're talking about. But Soldier specifically, because I play DPS, was a good example. Now obviously it's not exactly the same, but the basic principle of it remains. If I play Soldier against a McCree, we have different normals. Our attacks are different, we have different ranges, we have different things that we want to bait out of each other. For instance, if I'm playing Soldier against a McCree, I might want to walk within his stun distance and then walk out, in a decent attempt to bait his best ability. Once he's done that, I could then whiff punish with my assault rifle or helix rockets if I have them. Another character that can do this very well is Reaper. Reaper is perhaps the best at the footsie game in Overwatch. He does incredible damage close up and can wraith form away. He can also teleport behind you, so it's kind of cheating, although not really. When you're playing your next game, I want you to think about this concept. If you play a ground-based DPS, try and observe how the opponent you're playing against behaves when you walk within their range and then back out again. Obviously not every fight in Overwatch is 1v1. It's a very team fighting game, and that's the big difference between Overwatch and fighting games. But character matchups specifically, there's huge similarities. Let's look at another character, like Genji. Genji is almost all footsies. He has long range normals, his shurikens, he has close range normals, his wide fan, and he has special moves. He can bait and reflect, and he can sword dash. So someone that understands how to use Genji and how to get the most out of him would probably recognize this concept fairly easily. Tracer is another example. In fact, all characters that are capable of flanking are what I would consider Overwatch footsie characters. Tracer is nothing but a bait character to a certain extent. She's always trying to bait you into focusing your attention on her and warping away. She has a distinct advantage in the footsie game, especially against a McCree. If you avoid the stun, or better yet bait it out, he should be an easy kill. She's excellent at whiff punishing squishies. Footsies aren't the only similarity between Overwatch and fighting games. The other is the concept of good and bad matchups. Now we all know when we have our favourite character in Overwatch that they probably have a very specific counter. I play McCree a lot, and it seems in the current meta that virtually everyone counters him. But that concept of your abilities matching up unfavourably against another character is not only present in other games like MOBAs, but is deeply present in fighting games. There are some matchups in Street Fighter that are so bad that it's recommended that the player pick a secondary character. This is why in games like Overwatch, maining a character isn't as viable as you might think. Let's take Genji versus Winston for example. Now it is possible for a Genji to beat a Winston, but most of the time a Winston should take care of a Genji fairly easily. He can keep up with him, his weapon can't be reflected, he has many advantages, not only in the footsie battle, but in the straight up ability battle. Now in Street Fighter, they compare matchups by positing a theoretical first to 10. And in that first to 10, how you show if the character has favor is you say that that character would win more of the matches out of the 10 played. So for example, a terrible matchup in Street Fighter historically has been Dalsim versus Ryu. Now a bad matchup, a really bad matchup in Street Fighter is seen as 6-4 in a character's favor. That's really extremely poor. How would we apply that to Overwatch? Well, I think that Winston Genji is 6-4 in Winston's favor. When people in YouTube videos videos say these kinds of things about a character should counter another, we're talking about if everything's equal, if the players are of equal skill. But you can quite easily see if you look at the roster that most characters have a direct counter, and that forms the basis of how you build a comp. Another great example would be Widow versus Diva. Widow sees less and less play these days because it's so spectacularly easy for characters like Diva to focus her down. Her footsie game is extremely long range, like a character like Dalsim from Street Fighter. A character that can rush down, say a character like Ken in Street Fighter V, would win that matchup against Dalsim, just as Diva wins the matchup against Widow most of the time. This next point isn't strictly from fighting games, it's from too many different genres to say that specifically. It occurs in many other games that Overwatch takes influence from too. But it is worth noting the fact that every character is unique, has their own special moves, and has good and bad matchups. That's a fighting game. It's just that the fighting in this game is done in first person. The principles are the same. No one thing, no 10,000. In a previous video we talked about meta heroes. Fighting games have this concept too, and that's in the concept of tier lists. So although in Street Fighter certain characters have good and bad matchups, there are obviously characters that have more favourable matchups than they do negative ones, thus making them high in the tier list. Currently Ryu in Street Fighter is most people's choice for the top of the tier list. I think it's a lot closer in Overwatch, but I think a case could be made for Diva being the most important character, the most meta hero currently. She could be at the top of the Overwatch tier list, with characters like Torbjorn, Symmetra fairly low down. I know it's not strictly a parallel, but I just thought this comparison between Overwatch and fighting games was interesting, and as I play both kinds of games, I thought I'd share my thoughts with you. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to leave a like. If you'd like us to talk about anything specifically, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. I've been Eddie the Chump, and until next time.